We are still awaiting President Biden's remarks on that infrastructure bill. Let's talk about back to school season as students are heading back in just a couple of weeks, as administrators are contending with mask mandates and requirements and so much more. We have Yahoo Finance's education reporters Aarthi Swaminathan and Reggie Wade here for a conversation with Laura Jimenez, Director of Standards and Accountability for K-12 Education at the Center for American Progress.
Hey, Laura, thank you so much for joining us. So I just want to start this conversation with, I'm here in California, and we know that over the past year, COVID has really disrupted learning. And as a result, some of the schools here have changed their grading policies. So I wanted to ask you first and foremost, what have you seen and how diverse have some of these schools been in adjusting grading for students?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think along with the general chaotic nature that we saw schools kind of take on when they were first closed, we've seen the same thing with grading. So, for example, when it came to virtual learning, many experts, me included, were urging states to define what does a school day look like, how many hours in a school day, how many days a school week, to give local districts some structure regarding that. And that didn't really happen. And so I think we saw schools be designed across the gamut. And I think we saw a similar pattern emerge with grading. However, I would say many schools, the majority of them stopped grading toward the end of last year. And about half of them have picked up grading for this school year. And we've seen many instances in the media of the rise in the rates of students failing courses. And I think for me, that kind of begs the question, failing what?
Laura, Reggie Wade here. We see school districts in states such as Louisiana are thinking about scrapping letter and number grades as they've seen standardized test scores plummet. What do you think of that? Some folks say that we need to still hold our students accountable, even amid a pandemic.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think for me, the first question is how do we hold the districts accountable, the states and districts accountable for providing an adequate education and a quality education during the pandemic? And that might be the first place I would start instead of holding students accountable. Because we're also seeing lots of reports of students struggling with mental health issues. We also know that not all of them are adequately connected to learning. They lack broadband access, they lack a device. And under those conditions, is it really fair to hold students accountable? I think is a question we need to be asking.
Laura, what happens with these students when they apply to college if you remove letter grades and standardized testing? Does it make them less competitive?
I think that's a great question. We don't quite know the answer yet. We did see a number of institutes of higher ed, many colleges, make the SAT or the ACT optional for this academic year. We did see, independent of the pandemic, the UC system was already making moves to make those tests optional for their systems. And I think we are at a moment in time questioning the value of those tests, at least in regards to college admissions, but also when it comes to school accountability. And that's definitely some work that I'm focusing a lot. How can we make assessment systems much better for our teachers and for our students?
Laura, you call for improving the quality of remote learning, but do you think there's much of an appetite for that in the U.S. with more and more people wanting to see their kids back in the classroom?
Well, I think what we are going to see, at least in the short term, is probably inconsistent return to full-time instruction in the classroom, especially as variants emerge. We are going to have some localities that do either all virtual or do a hybrid, or make it optional for students to be in the building. And under those conditions, I do think that it is incumbent upon school districts to improve the quality of virtual learning, because there will be some portion of students, especially those who are Black and Latinx and Indigenous, who also suffer some of the greater impacts of the pandemic, to be learning from home.
Mm. And just quickly, I just wanted to ask you in terms of global competitiveness, how are you thinking about the US rankings? Do you think that we might sink a little bit lower this year, or do you think that it's just going to be a depressed year for all of the countries in the world?
That remains to be seen. We do know that the United States has middle of the road rankings when it comes to an international assessment called the PISA. But that's kind of been a long-standing issue for the United States, as we've had academic standards that are pretty inconsistent state to state. And up until around 2010, when states adopted the Common Core standards, their standards were fairly low. So I think the issue of America's academic standing globally is an issue that is independent of the pandemic and certainly will have an impact. But like you said, I think we might be seeing some of that internationally as well.
Or do you think that we will see an emphasis put on teacher training coming through this pandemic, because teachers are asked to do so much and they have so many different roles already? But some teachers, quite frankly, need to be trained on things of technology and remote learning, as we discussed. Do you think that will come out of this?
I hope that an emphasis on teacher professional development writ large is something that we come out of this on when it comes to providing great instruction, being masters of the academic standards, using the available tools. The US is far, far behind the countries that outperform it on those international assessments in terms of providing evidence-based professional development to teachers. And frankly, we've got a lot of catching up to do.
Center for American Progress, and of course, our very own Aarthi Swaminathan and Reggie Wade for bringing us that very important conversation.